In this episode of Ideas, I talk with the brilliant Liz Wiseman about her book, Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter. It's one of my favorite leadership books of all time. I'm recommending it all the time to pretty much everyone. So I naturally wanted to bring her on the show to talk about the ideas found in the book. We also discuss her journey to becoming a leadership expert. We discuss passion. We discuss the opposite of multipliers, known as diminishers, and we discuss much, much more. All right, here we go. All right, today's guest is Liz Wiseman. She is the president of the Wiseman Group, a leadership research and development firm where she teaches leadership to executives and emerging leaders around the world. Liz has also been named one of the top 10 leadership thinkers in the world, and she's here today to talk about her book, Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter. Liz, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, Adam, it is absolutely my pleasure.
Well, it's great talking to you too. And just so listeners can get a quick snapshot of your story, I want to start off by asking you, what did your journey look like exactly to becoming one of the top leadership experts in the world? How did you get to where you're at today?
Oh, it is a funny little journey because it's absolutely circular. In some ways, here I am, what is it, about maybe 30 years into my career, and I'm finally doing the job that I wanted to do right out of college. Strangely, I came out of college. I came out of business school with two aspirations, if you will. One was to go work somewhere, learn something useful, and then maybe go get a PhD and teach. But even more specifically, I wanted to get a job teaching management or teaching leadership, and I got a hold of the leading company at the time and sent my resume in and got a hold. Somehow I finagled my way into talking to the president of this company. They were called Zanger Miller. And at the time, they were the premier management training company. And I told the president that he should hire me and I wanted to teach management. And Ed Musselwhite, he listened to me and was a very cordial man. And he's like, "Oh, you just sound great. You sound great. But, like kind of, can I offer you some free advice sort of thing?" He said, "If you want to teach management, maybe you should go get some experience managing." Which of course had not really occurred to me. I just, I knew what I wanted to do and I was just kind of going for it, straight to the goal. And I hated his advice. Of course, I hated it. And, I sort of begrudgingly took it though and took a job working at Oracle, which was this rapidly growing software company. And, they're growing so fast that a year out of college, a year out of business school, and a year into my career, I get thrown into a management position. And it's actually not a position I want. I had been teaching and teaching technology quite happily, and I love teaching. And I was like, don't put me in management. Like, that's for losers. And then I realized, wait a minute. And told me, go get some experience managing. So I said, "Oh, I'll take that job." I had no clue what I was doing and was really underaged for a pretty big job. But so I got thrown into management and I spent the next 16 years managing and leading people and a corporate education function. And eventually I left and started to do some executive coaching and research and writing and teaching. And now, I get to teach leadership all around the world to the most seasoned executives and like people of influence, but also to the rising generation. And I love it, but essentially it's the job that I wanted right out of college. And it was funny, just this morning I was thinking about something it's a quote from a book I wrote, but it's the T.S. Eliot quote that, "You shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our journey will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time."
I love that.
Yeah, in some ways I've arrived where I started, but I actually know and understand a little bit more about the challenges of leading and managing people. And anyway, that's my journey.
You said that right out of college you wanted to teach leadership. Was there something initially there that set inside you that leaders aren't doing things the way they should to make you want to do that? Did you see that they were doing things right and you wanted to just support that? Where do you think that initial longing to teach leadership came from?
I don't really know. Sometimes it's
Okay,
hard to go back and remember what it was like when you didn't know something.
sure.
So I'm not entirely sure, but certainly when I was at Oracle and it was this small but rapidly growing company, it was very apparent that there were a lot of people like me who got thrown into to leadership unawares and a little bit not unwilling, but definitely premature and before our time. And so there's a lot of us who were just kind of figuring it out and experimenting on the poor people that we led. And so that helped me see that there was a gaping need, that just because you're good at doing something doesn't mean you're good at teaching other people to do it. And it doesn't mean you're necessarily good at leading people
Mm,
to do the work.
yeah.
And I think maybe I've been drawn to leadership and management my whole life. I think because, I mean, Adam, truth be told, I think I was just born bossy. you know, it doesn't take much of a vacuum for me to want to step in and take charge of something. Like all it
Sure.
takes is like 3 minutes where a group of people can't figure out where they want to go out to eat for dinner. Where I'm like, okay, leadership needed here. Okay, what do you want to go? Where do you want to go? Like, I don't know. I've been like that, maybe a little bit take charge, bordering on bossy since I was young.
Well, you're obviously good at leadership, and the reason I wanted to bring you on the show is because your book Multipliers, and we were talking before the show. It is one of my top five leadership books I've ever read, and I constantly recommend it to people. It's just a good book, whether you're already in leadership, to go back, and it's so foundational. But I imagine it as anybody on my leadership team ever, anybody listening, this would be one of the first books you would want to hand them because it changes mindset, it changes the reasons you do the things that you do. And the reason I say that is because so many leaders have the mentality that it's their way or the highway, or that they should always have the best answers. And your book presents that this just isn't the case, that everybody has ideas, valuable ideas, and that these people should not go untapped, and they all have something valuable to offer. Everybody does. And I just love that perspective. But for you, I mean, we talked about that initial longing to teach leadership. It's always been something in you. But for the book itself, Multipliers, why did you feel initially compelled to write that book? And we were also talking about before we started recording that it takes years to write a book. So it's not only the idea, but the time and effort that goes into writing. What was it that pushed you to write it? Did you keep running into leaders, the ones that it's my way or the highway, or was it something else?
I think I wrote it. First of all, my great advantage in writing Multipliers is that it was my first book and I didn't know how hard it was. And,
Sure.
so
Yeah.
I had the advantage of ignorance of saying, oh, yeah, I can do that. That doesn't seem that hard. Well, it turns out it was hard. But
Yeah.
but the reason I wrote it is there was a vacuum. Like I could see something so clearly. And here was the observation. The observation came out of my years in the corporate world where it just was so clear to me that there was underutilized or latent talent all around us. And really the idea for multipliers, it came out of being dropped into Oracle. So, when
Mm,
Oracle was trying to manage their rapid growth, they had to do a lot of hiring. And so they came up with a very clear hiring profile. And the profile it was this like trifecta of talent, which was hire for raw intelligence, because we were, solving problems that had never been solved before. So raw intelligence, achievement orientation. It's like, and they really looked for people with a bit of a freaky achievement orientation. Like I noticed that when I joined the company, I'm like, why are there so many like Olympic athletes? Like there's a lot
hmm,
of really put together people. So raw
really?
intelligence, achievement orientation, and then nice
Hmm.
was the third. And like my observation from having worked there a number of years, sometimes they compromised on that third criteria. And but everyone was
That's
really
fun.
smart and driven. And so, and they hired from 17 schools, top schools in the nation. I did not go to one of these schools. And I think there was magic for me in not having come out of that system, having come out of one of those 17 schools. Like maybe my school was the 18th. I don't know. But everyone was so smart. And I think because I maybe wasn't in that group of 17 schools, I just appreciated that I got to work there. And it wasn't like there was no imposter syndrome. It wasn't like, oh gee, I don't deserve to be here. I just felt incredibly lucky to be working with such really smart, capable people. But okay, so now here's where it gets interesting is what I noticed because I start watching all these smart people. I'm like, wow, yeah, everyone's smart, but not everyone causes smarts. And again, I got thrown into management really young. I was probably 25 when I got my first big management job. And so I'm thrown in with all these smart people. I'm now one of the bosses. And I look around and I say, wow, not all these people who are smart end up generating smarts on their team, meaning that there's a lot of smart people when they get put into management, never get beyond their own intelligence, their own ideas, their own know-how. They're still fixated on that. And because of that, they don't see and use the genius of others very well. In fact, a lot of these leaders were brilliant, but for them to be brilliant, like in some ways, for there to be enough room in the room for their brilliance, everyone else had to kind of hold back, sort of like be on the perimeter of the room and sort of make way for the intelligence of these leaders. And essentially what they were is they were smart people who dumbed down the organization. And I think we've all seen really smart people just like suck the intelligence and capability out of a group of people.
Absolutely.
And it
Yeah.
bothered me. It really bothered me. And but yet, that wasn't the only model of leader, of course. I also worked alongside leaders who were brilliant, but yet people around them got to be brilliant. And in some ways, people were at their very best around these leaders. And I just noticed it. And it wasn't until I left Oracle and I started doing some executive coaching. I live right here in Silicon Valley where there's a lot of really smart people with a lot of like deep technical knowledge that as leaders they struggle, and I saw more than one of them struggle. And honestly, I just went out looking for an HBR article. Like I'm like, oh, clearly HBR's got an article on this because it's so obvious to me that this is a problem. And I went out looking for some research just to be able to, like, I don't know, share an article with someone who needed this, and it wasn't there. And in talking it through, I realized that, we needed to explore why are some leaders multipliers to the intelligence of their team and other leaders are diminishers.
And yeah, that's the diminishers you talk about in the book, the opposite of multipliers. And so you talk about writing the book, but going back to those situations, how would you say that the rest of us, if we're multipliers and we see someone who is diminishing their team, how are the rest of us supposed to handle that? As far as, I mean, you wrote the book on it, but in those moments when you saw these people defeated, is there a way to make people see the need to become multipliers if they're diminishers? Is there any hope? Can you learn to be a multiplier if you're a diminisher? I know that's a loaded
Yeah.
question, but I think it's important to tackle.
Well, if the answer is no, we're going to have a very short podcast, aren't we? Like,
Yes,
no,
we
it
are.
just,
I hope
it
the answer is
sucks. It
yes.
just sucks to be you if you find
Yeah.
yourself working with one of these. No, that's what was so fascinating. And when I first wrote Multipliers and when I wrote the first edition of the book, I was really focused on what is this dynamic and what cost do these diminishing leaders come at? And I found that economically they come at a real cost because they get less than half of people's available intelligence. 48% was the number that came out of my research,
Mm.
whereas these multiplier leaders really use all of the capability of others. It's this 2x difference. But my whole purpose in this first book was to really look at what's the anatomy of these two different leaders. Like, what does it diminishers do? What do multipliers do? How do we end up diminishing others while sometimes having really good intentions? How do we end up the accidental diminisher? And then how does someone become more of a multiplier leader? And that's really what the first edition of the book did. And I've seen so many people. Well, I've seen the full range of response. I've seen people say, Liz, hey, I read your book, loved it. I'm such a multiplier, but yet I actually know this person and I know the people who work for them, and it's not what their employees would say. Like I've seen people read the entire book and not see it in themselves at all. And I've seen people have the complete opposite reaction, which is, "Hey, I read your book. It was painful. I'm a total diminisher. What do I do?" I've also seen people say, "I read your book. I'm a total diminisher." Well, that's too bad. It's just kind of who I am. And so, can people learn to be more of these multiplier kinds of leaders? The answer is absolutely and of course, but it's hard. It's hard to will that for someone else. We can only really will it for ourselves. Meaning, I think everyone knows this is not a revelation to anyone, is that the only person you ever really get to change in the world is yourself.
That's right.
And
No doubt. Yep.
I mean, it's kind of obvious to say it, but boy, I've sure spent a number of years earlier in my life acting as if that weren't true, like
Oh, me
trying to
too.
change my boss or my family members or my husband or my kids. And you come to a point where you realize, like, take all that energy and apply it toward yourself, and things really change. So, those who see their diminishing streak, and particularly those who see the ways that they are accidental diminishers, I've seen people make incredible gains and strides. I've seen it transform teams and organizations and families. I mean, it's been so inspiring to me. But you also asked a different question. You asked, what do you do when you see it in others?
Yeah.
And I realized that that was a question I had really woefully under addressed, which is how do you deal with the inevitable diminishers around you? And so as I was pulling together this second edition of the book, which is a real major, I say it's a major upgrade, but Adam, I might just say that because it was just such a major project and it's such a major piece of heavy lifting on my part that I like to think it was a major upgrade to the book. But I added a whole chapter and launched a whole research project studying how do we deal with the diminishers who in many ways aren't going away anytime soon,
Yeah.
and how are we responding today? And is it working? And if not, what actually works? And so I've dug into this to the point where actually sometimes in my interviews and looking at some of the transcripts, it actually brings tears to my eyes hearing people describe what it's like being trapped under diminishers. And what I could say in summary is the things that we're doing today are really not working. Like the top 5 things that we do in dealing with diminishers are the top 5 least effective things.
With saying all this, if someone listening finds themselves currently on a team where their boss is a diminisher, is the only option to quit? Or is there something that they can begin doing? Because nobody likes to feel powerless. And, the idea of quitting can be portrayed as something so negative, but in fact, quitting can many times lead people to better opportunities, just something better in their life. I mean, what would your recommendation be for them? Is there something they can do to try to change it before they quit, or is quitting, in fact, the only option they have?
Quitting is a option. It's not the only option. Some people would say if you're stuck working for an abject diminisher, it is the only option. The problem with quitting is that a lot of people quit, and we know people take jobs but then quit bosses.
Yeah.
That is well documented. But the problem is when people quit their diminisher bosses, they then go and that cycle repeats and they go look for a new job, right? Because people
Hmm.
take jobs but quit bosses. So they then go look for a new job. And what do you think they find at their new job?
The same thing.
They find another diminisher, just, she has a different name.
Yeah.
And because most people are at their best behavior in the recruiting process. New recruits are at their best, but bosses tend to be at their best too. Very few bosses say, "Oh, by the way, you should know I micromanage. I'm a bit of a control freak. I don't want you looking better than me. So I'm going to kind of suppress you and keep you in this box so as to, like who says this?"
Hmm.
And so if you're going to quit, make sure you quit and then go shop for a new boss.
Mm.
Boy, if I had a single message for people coming out of college is don't worry about what job you take, worry about what boss you take,
Hmm.
and shop for someone who's going to be a multiplier to you. And particularly early on in your career, this person is either going to do great expediting of your potential across your career, or they're going to potentially do damage that lasts forever. It's like you come out of school with a boss who says, no, 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 that's not your job. You're just sort of be seen, not heard, kind of keeps you in a boss, doesn't let you take risks. It's learned behavior that you tend to carry into your next jobs. Like, oh, I'll speak when I'm spoken to, or, oh, I'm not supposed to outshine the boss. So you end up learning kind of limiting behaviors.
That's really challenging advice and really different advice. So let's talk about the idea of passion then. I wasn't planning on going into this, but that
Let's go
just.
there.
So you're saying that instead of looking for a job, look for your boss instead. So do you believe that people should initially look for their passion, or do you think that thriving under a boss will then lead someone to their passion? How does that work if we're looking for a boss instead of the job?
I wouldn't say take any old job,
Okay.
but if I had to choose between a job that I love under an oppressive boss versus kind of just any old job under an amazing boss, I might start out with just any old job under amazing boss, because you'll find your way to make your passion. I think, and Adam, I might take a little bit of a strong point of view for debate's sake on this, because I think, and it really is to counter, I think, a swell, a voice that is being shared with so many people coming out of school right now, is that, you should go find your passion and follow your passion. And often these are people in their 50s who speak at commencement addresses who say these things. And they've had 30 years to figure this out. And I think if my advice would be very, very different. It wouldn't be follow your passion. It would be learn about your passion and let it evolve. Like, pay attention to what you're passionate about, make notes, like write it in a journal, talk about it, think about it, reflect about it, keep moving in that direction. But my advice to people, if you want to have not only a successful career, but find a lot of joy in your work, is find a way to be passionate about what you're doing. And more than anything, kind of like make yourself useful. I had an experience, if I could share this, the experience I had early on in my career, and it was right before I got thrown into that management position at Oracle. And I had been doing a job, and there was some reorganization in the company, and I had been doing something related to training and managing training programs, and I was interviewing internally for another job, and it would be in what would become what was our training group and what would become Oracle University. And I'm talking to my boss's boss, who was the vice president responsible for administration at Oracle. And I'm telling him, and you can guess what I am telling him based on what I want to do coming out of college. I'm like, you know what? Hey, we really need a management training program around this company. It was growing past, we're throwing managers. And so I kind of make this passionate plea for this is there's a need here, and I'd love to do this, and this is something I can contribute to this training group. And Bob Shaver, the vice president, he listens to me and kind of smiles and, kind of pats me on the head saying, like, Liz, we're so thrilled to have you join this group. But we have a little bit of a different problem, is that we are hiring technologists by the thousands, and we're bringing all of these computer programmers and engineers into the company, and we need to get them up to speed on Oracle technology. What we really, like, we have to figure out how to get them up to speed on Oracle technology really fast. I suggest you help your boss who has to solve that problem. I suggest you help your boss solve that problem. And it wasn't a management training problem, it was a technical training problem. And ask me how much passion I had for technical training.
How much did you have?
Yeah, kind of zero. Zero. But I could fake it to a like 5 out of 10 because I worked for a technology company, and I could see that that was important. And I'm like, man, that's not what I want to do.
Sure.
But essentially what he was saying to me is go make yourself useful.
Hmm.
And I was just smart enough and just humble enough to say, okay, it's not what I want to do, but I clearly see this was what needs to be done.
That's
and I'll
good.
go do it. And I became so passionate about this. I still think it was the coup of my career, which I'm in some ways spilling the beans talking to you, is that I knew nothing about technology. I mean, I had taken a couple programming courses in college, but I'm now teaching programming to people coming in with bachelor's and master's and PhD in computer science and electrical engineering and artificial intelligence. And I'm teaching them how to program, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm learning really fast. And I was really actually passionate about it, and I think got an award for like the best technology trainer of the year or something in the company
Very cool.
because I just challenged the passion I had for teaching into that. And it's interesting what happened. You can imagine what happened. They're like, well, hey, yeah, like you were willing to sort of subordinate self a bit and go do the thing and solve the problem we needed solved. And they just kept giving me bigger and bigger problems to solve. And after a few rounds of that, I now have a lot of latitude in what I work on. And soon people aren't saying, here's what we need you to do. It's more like, Liz, what do you want to do? Like, where can you best contribute?
That's really good. What you're saying is it's more about seeing the needs of others than, I mean, and it's not only talent, but it's also seeing the needs of others and passion and meeting those things together. And I think that's really beautiful. And to talk about the ideas that you have already in your book, it just reminds me a lot about not only the awareness of others, you're looking outward for you to see that there are multipliers and diminishers. Not only are you aware, but I think empathy is playing a big role in all of this as well. And it's seeing the needs of others and then acting and reacting accordingly.
Exactly. And I think, you hit the nail on the head with this. Is one of the first things I noticed about these multiplier leaders is where their orientation was. And it was absolutely outward. And it's not, gee, here's what I know and here's what I think, and how do I broadcast that and replicate that? Like, how do I sort of tell and sell and compel, which is really the way of the diminisher? It's they're thinking, not what do I know, it's what do the other people around me need to know. And a very dear mentor of mine, Dr. C.K. Prahalad at the University of Michigan, he had said, when in reacting to my research, and he had seen kind of early drafts of the book and the research, he said, this strikes me as important because the critical skill of this century is not what you know. It's your ability to tap into and access what the people around you know. Learning right now is far more valuable than knowing. And really, it's the orientation. If you want to be a powerful leader, you've got to take your orientation off of yourself and put it onto your team. Even like being able to see where people are underutilized and like, wow, Sunir, he's doing a great job, but he could do more. Mary is in the wrong role. It's not using her genius. Let's get her in a role that uses her genius. And I actually think that's what we're most passionate about. Is like we get really passionate about work that we tend to be good at and uses kind of our native brilliance.
I like that. And we could go down a lot of trails here, but
Is that a nice way of saying I'm completely random in my thoughts?
no, no, I think we led to something beautiful here because I mean, in your talk about your book, you were saying that people had read your book and didn't realize that they were a diminisher, yet your book opened their eyes. I mean, there's so many things that your message can portray to those people and show them that, maybe I'm not, it's a gut check for all of us because the word team is thrown around so loosely. But to me, a team is everybody's on board and you are uplifting people. But if you use the word team about your team and you're a diminisher, then are you in fact a team? And I would say probably not. You're not a good team, at least.
Yeah, like a random collection of people who probably all need to go to the same therapist because they
Yes.
have the same boss.
Right. Right. And that's just what that has me thinking about because I think we've all been a part of teams where we weren't really teams, and this is really just not only a gut check, like I said, but also going forward, how will we ensure that our teams our actual teams. And it's a challenge for all of us, myself included. And I just want to say again, everybody needs to go pick up a copy of Multipliers like today or tomorrow, whatever that is. It's such a great book. But I also wanted to quickly touch on another book of yours titled Rookie Smarts. And I just want listeners to be able to hear from you what the premise of that book is, and then just some ideas that really jumped out at you as you were researching and writing that book that might be useful for listeners.
It's funny. The book was a little bit of an accident. It started with a rant to my publisher. I was meeting with my publisher in New York City, and we were there to talk about what would be a good follow-on book to Multipliers and what was next. And I came prepared with thoughts. But our conversation started with me ranting about something. And I was telling her, I'm like, I've always been fascinated with the fact that we tend to be at our best strangely when we're new to something. And once we develop expertise, like it's so easy to lose our edge and become so familiar and get trapped in assumptions. And I'm ranting about this. And she said, so wisely, she said, Liz, why don't you dig into that? Like that might be your next piece of work. And it wasn't my plan, but it was something I cared very, very much about. And for some of it was my experience in my own work and career. But what I looked at was, is it possible that we're actually at our best when we're new and when we're naive and when we're rookies? And what I found in studying this, I studied how people with deep experience approach a task, a piece of work, and how people who are new to that approach that. And I don't mean new as in young, just new to something, like doing something for the first time. And what I found is that, of course, there's certain advantages that deep knowledge and expertise bring. Like no one wants a rookie dentist or,
Yeah.
you don't want to jump out of a tandem jump with some guy who says, whoa, dude, totally cool. This is my first jump too. Like
Yeah.
there's certain things that you don't need rookie smart. But we find that
Right.
when we're in this rookie zone, new to something and not just new to anything, new to something that's important and hard, like Adam, in your case, like writing your first book,
Yeah.
that we find that there's a learner's advantage that kicks in. And in this space of not knowing, there's some incredible power because we're humble.
Hmm.
We're seekers. We ask good questions. We stay curious a lot longer. We reach out to experts and we end up in our state of naivete in some ways. We end up mobilizing more expertise than we do when we're just given a job we know how to do. And I think this dynamic is particularly important right now where the world of work is spinning very fast. We all feel it. And the things we know don't stay true for very long. Like I'm now at the age and station in my career where I'm like, oh, this is the part where it's easy. I get to coast and just draw on everything I know. Well, the shelf life on what I know isn't very long. Like
Hmm.
most of it's no longer relevant. I did some interesting calculations and I looked at if you work in STEM, science, technology, engineering, or math fields, or fields that are heavily infused with sort of technology, where technology kind of is the underpinning of that work, is given the rate at which information is increasing and given the rate at which information is evaporating, where things become obsolete. I calculated that 15% of what we know today is likely to be relevant in 5 years.
Hmm.
So I should be
Hmm.
clear, that's not 50 as in half, that's 1/5, as in more than 10%, less than 20%.
Wow.
So we're in an environment where expertise has a pretty short shelf life.
Yeah.
And so I think that, the message that comes out of the book is one, use your rookie talent, like those people who you think are kind of know nothings that need to be trained. They might actually be your most valuable resource.
That's
And
really good.
and two is as you mature in your career and as you find success and you become kind of a go-to person, like do your very best to maintain this sort of hungry and foolish way of working that was at once so easy for you.
There's a brilliance that comes when people come to something new. I know in my own life, there's just this fascination with it. And that's a really good reminder to get back there. And then also a reminder that the need to constantly reinvent ourselves is present as well in this day and age with everything moving so fast. It's easy to become comfortable with even what we're currently good at instead of learning something new. And that's just an important challenge for all of us as well. Thank you so much for that. Yeah.
Yeah, your word you used is an interesting one. There is a fascination with that. And what happens when you keep working from a place of fascination?
Mm,
Like, wow, it's almost like, if you're working with childlike wonder,
yeah,
like, whoa, isn't it cool? Isn't it amazing how this works? Or isn't it amazing how people work?
it is.
Which is what I try to stay fascinated in.
That it is. No doubt. Wow. Lots to think about today, Liz. Thank you again for everything you offered us. Wrapping up here, if there's one last piece of advice that you'd like to leave listeners with, it could be something that we've already talked about and you just want to highlight. It could be something that we didn't get to today. But what would that one piece of advice be?
Hmm. Well, if I just get one,
Just one.
just one, I'm gonna share something that I've both learned in studying these multiplier leaders, but it's also something I've learned in studying why being new to something is such an advantage. And my piece of advice would be just tell less and ask more.
Mm,
Operate from a place of inquiry, ask questions, ask good questions, ask curious questions that cause other people to think and innovate and disrupt. Yeah, the best leaders definitely tell less and ask more.
wow. It's really good. All good stuff here. Last question for you. Where would you like to send people to find out more about you and your work?
Well, there's several places people can go. My team that I lead, our research and development team, we are the wisemangroup.com, and you can get information about what we do there. But if you want more information on the books, there's multipliersbooks.com, and we've tried to pack that website. It's probably too much on there, but we've tried to pack it with a lot of tools and resources for leaders, particularly those whose companies may not have training programs. Probably the crown jewel of that website is the Are You an Accidental Diminisher quiz? And it's short, like 3 minutes to take it. And people say it's really changed the way they lead. So there's a useful little quiz. You can go to rookiesmarts.com, and let me see, you can find me on Twitter at Liz Wiseman.
Awesome. All right. Everybody, make sure to pick up a copy of Multipliers again. Liz, thank you so much for taking the time. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Oh, well, I love talking to you. We could talk forever, but I
We
don't think
could.
anyone would appreciate that but us.
It was a lot of fun, no doubt. And we'll have to do this again sometime.
Okay. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you got something out of these ideas. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode.